Hello everybody, Gray here. Welcome back to the Drowsy Bear Inn. I hope you've been enjoying the stuff that's been put out so far. I know this video is going to be coming out hopefully today, which is Saturday, in a few hours or so, because it shouldn't take too long to get through this next part of the story of the Age of Magic Fur. So, let's get right back into it, shall we? Last time Ralph and Colungo had a hunting expedition. They had a little bit of an encounter, and afterwards returned back to their little hidden village. Now, bringing back the spoils of their encounter, and giving them to giving them to Gil. Meeting a friend along the way named Rudy. Rudy was a badger, a anthropomorphic badger who had taught Colungo how to kind of be more in tune with nature and such. She was a ranger, and she had a little sparrow companion called Brownie, I believe is. I should get my notes just in case. Hang on. Oh boy, bringing out the binder, bringing out the notebook, just in case I need them, which I will probably a lot, because it's been a while since we did the second thing. So anyway, Rudy and Brownie met up with them. They had a slight, how are you doing? How's it going? How was your day? They told her about how they had encountered, or about their encounter, and went to go see Gil again, who, if you recall, is the anthropomorphic lizard who was the quote-unquote captain of the guard. At least for the immediate town. Upon coming into Gil's sort of main little ramshackle shack that he has as his office, I guess. It's more just that is the guard house, but it's a small kind of pieced together by wood and bark and sap and all that kind of stuff, and it's just it's small enough that it holds, I would say, about 4 people all at once, 4 regularly sized people, comfortably. But it's a single room, so it's more like a meeting room, really. Anyway, so they brought him their spoils, and they gave him the armor and such, the daggers that they didn't need, and the swords and such, so that they could be distributed out to the protectors of the village for upgrades from their stone and such. Typical thing that they did in their village. Upon doing so, some other sparrows, actually, these ones who could speak and who were more anthropomorphic, they were still very small, but they were at least, able to talk. They came and told Gil that they had to talk to him and Bluster, the town elder, about something that was coming. And so he excused himself and said, to Colungo and Ralph and Rudy, he'll see them later or see them around and such, and he had to go do this. So he left, and Colungo and Ralph kind of separated and just kind of did some stuff. Colungo went to go help their parents, which I believe I have their names. Hold on. So Colungo went to go help his parents, Ruth and Picard Henderson, because that's Ralph Henderson was what the rat character's full name was. So I was like, okay. Ruth and Picard Henderson then, because I had them name their parents. And so Colungo went to go help them, while Ralph went and he just kind of did his own thing for a little while. I don't specifically remember what he was doing, but it wasn't really anything too important as far as I recall. That being said, after I would say about an hour or so, they were then notified. The entire village was notified via those sparrows flitting around telling everybody that they had to come to the center to hear Bluster announce something. Upon the entirety of the village coming to the center and looking upon the great cave that Bluster dwelled in, that kind of bordered the center of town, he came out, his walking staff in hand, and he delivered the news to them, saying that the sparrows had found on their scouting, they had found that because the town usually sent scouts, these sparrow scouts, out to just make sure that people weren't getting too close and just to have general surveys of the area in order to, make it so that people are safe. They also acted as scouts for another faction that I'll get into in a bit of this village in order to help them with their kind of missions. So the sparrows had come back and reported that there was hundreds upon hundreds of these green and gray skinned, small and some smaller than some like human children, and some that were as big as humans themselves, that were approaching. They seemed to take a more night focused march instead of, and they had camped out in the days. And the sparrows had kind of seen this threat coming. Sorry for all the pausing and ums, it's been a while. So upon receiving this news, they estimated that they would have a day to prepare and keep watch and wait for this incoming army from the east that's heading just straight west towards their forest. Bluster then said that he had spoken with Gil, and they had come up with a plan of having people, having the other townsfolk, those who were able, those who were fit and had at least, but at least were healthy enough to pick up a weapon and fight, that they were to report to him so that they could be put into groups and put along the eastern edge of the forest in order to keep watch and wait and prepare in order to defend their home. This is where we introduce two more characters. The other two who were able to make it for this session, who also had decided that they wanted to be anthropomorphic animals. So upon getting up to the line of people that were going to Gil's little meeting shack, he saw Colungo and Ralph as they came up, and he said, "You two work together. You two, you know each other, and your team. You usually do things together, and I won't split you up. So I'm gonna have you go and meet with a lupine who is situated on on the western edge of the village, and another who resides deeper into the forest. That one, he said, you'll know him when you see him. Now, a lupine, and I'm sure I've put a picture or something somewhere. A lupine is a sort of wolf dog person who their whole shtick in 3.5 at least, which is where I based everything from at this point because we were still in 3.5. A lupine is a humanoid. The lupine are highly militaristic. They teach their young from birth about combat, about tactics in order to combat werewolves, actually. And I asked the player who wanted to play him, or play a lupine, how he really, if he wanted that to be kind of how his faction would be. And he was like, yeah, I would definitely want to have it be that they kind of train to fight werewolves and such. And I was like, okay, that's fine. So the lupine themselves are like another faction of guards, in the sense that they are, again, highly militaristic and very trained in combat. These lupine use the sparrows to scout. They would also send out scouting like missions of the higher ups out of the forest, out into the actual world, to see and combat any kind of werewolf threat if they were aware of it. So some of the higher ups in their kind of faction had combated werewolves before, because they used the sparrows to kind of figure out and scout out kind of people and such. But it was never anything that was in like a major area. It was more if they had found a person that was kind of hidden out in the general wilderness, and they had the sparrows kind of watch them and such, and then they would go out after having a confirmation or have this be reported to them, and they would go and check for themselves and figure it out and take care of the threat if it was actually a threat, or if it was just a random hermit, they would, pull back and just let them be. So Ralph and Kalungo walked to the west edge of Silimnub, and they met up with two lupine. The one that they spoke to was a kind of more gruff commander who introduced them to their companion, Boris Wetnose, of the Wetnose clan. Boris Wetnose was a fighter. He used a tower shield that was made of just a big piece of bark, like oaken bark. He used spears. He would throw and use the shield to kind of set it in place and poke from behind it. There's a lot of feats in 3.5 that aren't in 5th edition, and the few that he took made it so that he was all about this whole shield and how he would use it in combat. One of the feats specifically is that you can use the shield by just placing it into the ground and having it be there as cover, while you can then just be behind using something like a two-handed weapon or something and poke out and have it always be there as your cover. And that was kind of his thing. They encountered Boris, and he was the youngest of the guard, the youngest pupper, if you would. Of course, followed his superior's orders to join this group so that they could protect the forest. The other thing to know about lupine is that they are extremely good at smelling and seeing. They get I think it was a +4 just to smell checks. So anything involving smells, which later on I then converted into advantage for perception based on smell. So I don't know. It's just one of those things. I did look at a homebrewed lupine for 5e, and it kind of said the same kind of things. It had a few different things as well, and I was like, okay. I also gave him a bite attack because he was a dog that was kind of trained to use all of his skills. So using his teeth and such would kind of feel natural in that kind of respect. But yeah, so Boris joined Ralph and Kalungo. He, again, being sort of more militaristic, he kind of just became the dedicated tank as he wanted to be of the group. He was more of the stoic for a little bit, stoic kind of companion. He didn't really have too much to say other than, agreeing with the orders and kind of putting in his input of a military kind of tactical aspect, at least for the time being. They then took Boris along with them to the indicated spot inside of the forest. And I have to pull something up now because I'm gonna mess this up if I don't have it in front of me. They traveled into the forest they found a clearing, and the clearing contained nothing too out of the ordinary except for a very large rock, or what appeared to them to be a rock. And Boris, then being the dog, immediately went to go sniff the rock. And as he sniffed the rock, it stirred, and he got the whiff of a kind of turtle-like being. And so they were introduced to give me a moment. Machiavelli, Demetrius, D'Artagnan, Oisipede, D'Angelo IV, otherwise known as Mach. In Savage Species, there wasn't any sort of turtle as far as I remember, and so my friend was who made this character, made Mach, was like, so in 5th edition there's turtles. Can I be a turtle but in 3rd? And I was like, okay, yeah, sure. And I went and looked at the turtles, and we changed it a little bit so that it would kind of fit more into 3.5. And so Mach was born. Mach is a monk. I don't think I know. Oh, yes. Well, we'll save what he does for when he does it later. But he at this point was a monk. So think of the tortoise from Kung Fu Panda, Oolong, I think it is, because he's Oolong like the tea. And Mach has his one defining characteristic. Upon meeting him, there's a few defining characteristics, excuse me. One, if he speaks in common, he speaks at a pace that is slow and meticulous. And every time he introduces himself, he goes and says, my name is Machiavelli Demetrius D'Artagnan Oisipede D'Angelo IV. Without fail, every time he introduces himself to anyone, always saying the entirety of the name. Then later saying, you can call me Mach. If he respects them. Being a turtle monk, he, of course, later on has a huge speed. But, for now, he's only a little faster. And he kept himself kind of quiet and such, and he would always find an excuse to brew tea. And I gave him just a kind of stone tea set, pot and a few cups, 4, I believe. And so, always, whenever the party has a moment, he will start to brew tea. He has a shit ton of water skins on his inventory just for tea, and he uses the moss and other things that kind of grow on his shell that make him look more like a rock when he's kind of hiding or retracted into his shell to brew this tea. And so they met him. He had not heard of this coming threat, but was happy to help, being more of an outsider to this community. He was more of a traveler in his pre-magicked being. So as a regular kind of tortoise or turtle, I don't remember, he walked the land, and he had some encounters with humans, one of them of course being that he was almost made into turtle soup. But he was in the forest at the same time as the rest of the animals when they had this incident happen that changed them. And he, of course, sticking to the outside, kind of just people knew of him, and he was aware of the town and such, but he didn't really keep to date with everything they were doing. But he still kind of had an affiliation. So he joined the group, and the 4 The band of four went to the eastern edge of the forest. They went and kind of set up. Mock, of course, started having tea, or brewing tea for them. And as the day kind of progressed, the other kind of groups of the animals that were also tasked with waiting and watching and fighting, or preparing to fend off an attack, they also kind of placed themselves along the northeastern, or more north of where they were, of the eastern side of the forest. And they saw them, and sparrows would come and relay things, or ask, if anybody needed food or anything, and that would be brought to them. It was a nice little not garrison, but outpost, if you will. And as the day kind of grew on, they all kind of got to know each other a little bit, and waited. Night fell. And with the night came a stillness. As they prepared and they watched and they waited, they saw. They saw fire. Little bits of fire coming from over the hills outside of the forest. They then, having some of them kind of peering, I had to make, perception, basically. Only a few noticed how many of these creatures there were. Now, the village of Silimnub, or Silimnib, excuse me. The village of Silimnib had only about 100 or so of these animal people. And looking out, there were many more of these creatures that were coming. And so they waited. They were situated kind of farther into they weren't immediately like at the edge. They were kind of a little bit in order to have that kind of tree cover, and the foliage in order to hide. And I had them roll to hide. And they all rolled pretty well as far as I remember. This being another day, we joked that Ralph would return to rolling fours, but he did not get too bad during this time. So they all watched and they waited and they hid. And these creatures, they kept marching and they entered the edge of the forest. And they saw these things that had, scraps of leather and gross bits, and the bigger ones carried the torches. Each of the bigger ones had a band of 3 or 4 of the smaller ones that were with them. For any of you who kind of figured it out already, these were goblins and hobgoblins that were marching across the continent, at least at that point. So the goblins and hobgoblins entered the forest, and they started to make their way through as silently as anything. They could not be heard. They seemed to have the ability to figure out exactly where to place their feet in order to not disrupt any of the brush or grass or twigs or anything that was just on the forest floor. But they could still be seen because the torchlight was kind of a giveaway, but they just crept through. And as they kind of got closer, then our small band decided, okay, when they get about 20 feet away, we'll attack. And so it began. The goblins and the hobgoblins didn't see what was coming to them at first, and the goblins themselves seemed to be squishier, if you would. Mock and Boris, the new members of the group, proved themselves pretty decent in combat, taking out a few of these goblins very quickly, while the hobgoblin itself threw javelins up kind of into the tree where Colungo was kind of hidden, who himself was throwing javelins back. Ralph had situated himself kind of in the brush as well, and was firing his little light crossbow, catching a couple of, shots in there, or getting a couple of shots to hit in there every now and again. The initial wave didn't last very long, but Colungo himself had taken a couple of them in the side and the arm, and taking a couple of the javelins in the side and the arm. And it only lasted a short amount of time, but they then, as the fight was kind of progressing, the hobgoblin itself, when most of its goblin compatriots had fallen, kind of let out a cry, which was then echoed by another one in a language that they couldn't understand. And another band of them kind of converged from a bit farther north, and they could hear the other groups all fighting, and shouts of pain from their allies, and a few of them kind of had fallen. But as they progressed, the new band again was taken out very swiftly, but they had a new tactic. The hobgoblins carrying these torches then began to light fires. The ones who had died, the torches had fallen and started to make fires spread along the ground. The team, our band of 4, decided to start trying to put out these fires that were around them, and they rolled very successfully in doing these things. Boris started to like a dog, turn around and start digging up dirt over them, putting out some of the flames. Mock took water skins and started to throw water all over. Colungo got down, and during the second encounter, he tried his little jump from the tree and land on something move, to no avail again, but was also down there, throwing his water skin, while Ralph as well followed suit. They at least had put out the fire of their area, but they noticed that north of them there was fires starting to spread, and some of the animals were trying to go for these flames, but the goblins and hobgoblins kept advancing and started to push them back and go for the ones that were trying to put out the fire in order for it to stop spreading. They quickly helped to accelerate it more by taking out more of the animals. And the group, at this point, unfortunately, my player who played Colungo was feeling quite sick at the time. So he was like, okay, you guys can keep going. I'm gonna go and lie down and try to feel better. And we were like, okay, well, we'll try to get your character to not be killed. And so at this point, I was controlling Colungo, trying to do him the best I could, which didn't last too long, because as they noticed that the other animals north of them were trying to, fend off the goblins and put out these fires, they decided they needed to rush in and help. So they started to go north and kind of flanked the left side of the goblins that were closest to them. This time, the battle wasn't as one-sided as it had been for them before. The dice had decided that at this point, they were going to start failing. And I was rolling as well for the animals and the goblins to see which side was going to kind of be taking the victories and the losses. And it was starting to now be more towards the goblins' favor, unfortunately. I was hoping that it wouldn't, but at the same time, they had a sizable force and they did have the numbers. So, it's just how the dice started rolling at that point, because the animals were doing okay for a while, and then it just started to go downhill, and it quickly started to spiral as our group started to miss attacks, and some of these goblins started to hit even harder. Kalungo, in fact, after the second round, I believe, got hit with a javelin and dropped, fell unconscious to the ground. And they started to fight desperately to get him to safety. As they started to see that the goblins were advancing and killing more than and wounding more than they could save, or they thought was tactically advantageous at that time, if you would. They were starting to do a lot of damage to the party, and they saw the many losses on their side. So Boris then decided to howl out a retreat for the lupine that were along the way to hear, and they also howled the retreat as well. Mock quickly grabbed Kalungo. Mock has a strength of about 19, so he was fine as he quickly grabbed Kalungo up, and they started to run. They all started just booking it through the forest back towards their town, noticing that the fire itself had kind of spread to the point that it hit the canopy and started to go aggressively over their heads. They started outrunning the fire, but it was very close behind them, burning all the leaves and the tops of the trees, just spreading the fire kind of on the ground in the grass, also spreading quickly, but not as quick as the canopy fire. They ran and kind of made it to the village. They regrouped with about only a few. They didn't, unfortunately, at the time they weren't able to take account, but at that point, the notable members, Gil was there, Bluster, nowhere to be found. They couldn't find Rudy. They didn't see the Kalungo and Ralph's parents. They didn't see many of their animal brethren. And so in the moment, they quickly decided, with Gil kind of as their makeshift leader, or at least the closest thing to the head of the people as they had, they decided they needed to run towards where they were keeping the sick and the wounded on the opposite side of the forest, on the very far western side. So they took off, ran all the way there, found that their sick and wounded were there still, and at that point they took a head count, and there was only about 20 of the animals left. Including Boris, there were about 4 lupine. There were a couple of boar people. There was Ralph, Kalungo, Mock, Gil, and a few other animals. Most of them badly wounded, but still at least alive. And in that moment, they started to try to think of a plan. I showed them a bit of the area that they knew. So they knew about Crommerth. They knew that there was Glow farther west of them, and that, you know, they didn't know too much more about the area past that. At least not as far as they knew. None of them saw sparrows during this, so they didn't really have anybody else who kind of knew farther than that. The highest command of the lupine that had survived there was just the captain, one of the captains, but he unfortunately had not known much more than the rest of them. So they decided, okay, they would go between Glow and Crommerth and start making their way kind of to the edge of the continent that way. And there is right on the eastern side of there's a little circle in the middle of a kind of peninsula. I'm sure I'll point it out in the video, but that is the Starlight Spire, which they didn't know too much about, but there is a cliff kind of cliffside that borders it on the western or the eastern side of it. So that they knew at least was a cliff. But farther down, there was the way to go towards the mountains and, more of the plains and the hilly kind of terrain. They decided to forego going towards either of the towns, straight through that little section. Once they had made it about a couple hours out, they looked back, saw the forest was still in flames, tried to look to see if any humans were kind of coming to them or on their way or anything. And they noticed that there were some that they could see the kind of glint of armor and swords and such. It wasn't obviously an hour or two after that, sorry. Before they had done that, they kind of circled around to the southeast or southwestern edge to kind of look to see, and that's when they saw the glints of armor and swords and people rushing out to combat these goblins. And they kind of used that opportunity to then scoot through and kind of try to keep themselves from being seen. So 2 hours out from the edge of the forest, they then tried to look for some sort of something, anything, right? And I told them that in the distance they could see kind of very large mountains, and they could see kind of in the moonlight, they could see kind of, the dark side of that kind of mountain. And they knew Cromworth was, back the way they had come. And then they had also seen that there was a cave nearby. And so they decided to, at least for the night, spend it in the cave with shifts of watch, in order to hopefully keep themselves safe, and not be followed, and be at least ready and kind of have that rest that they needed after such a heavy loss. Colungo at this point was still unconscious, but they brought him and the rest of the sick, wounded, and battle scarred to this cave, all of them kind of curling up, and Boris, Mock, Ralph, a few of the other lupine keeping watch through the night as they rested until morning. And that's where I think I'll end this part of the story today, because there was a lot of heavy hearts, as for Ralph at least, who realized that that his parents and his and Colungo's parents weren't there at the end, and he kind of, him and the rest, they all kind of had a bit of a sorrow kind of thing, where realizing that their village, their home, and a lot of the friends and family they knew, they were gone. But yeah, I think that's a good place to end it. And next time we'll pick it up with a lesson that I learned after having it happen, and a lesson that all of us to this day will always remember. But also a new purpose was given after this. So I hope you all enjoyed this. I thank you for watching it if you did, and I hope to see you again in the next one, as I continue telling you about our group's little endeavors and story. It's a lot of fun, as always, to kind of recount this kind of stuff. I might have missed a couple of things, and if any of my friends kind of watch this video and remember something that I forgot, they'll probably comment it or something. I don't know. But and at the end here, I will also say that there is a Discord. If you didn't know, I have a Discord that you can go and join, the Drowsy Bear in, the Discord itself, where I will be posting these videos as well as stuff that I make, as well as stuff that I make with my friends, our homebrew kind of content for 5e, and there's also a nice place to have some in-character chat and such, as well as there being, you know, I have a Twitter, now I have an Instagram that I kind of post pictures of things, which, I don't know, man, you like that stuff? Go follow it. The links will be in the description and also at the end, on the end card. But yeah, thanks for watching again. Hope you enjoyed. And I'll see you in the next thing. Bye.